Thank you all for joining us. Before we start, I just want to say a big thanks to everyone that came out and joined us yesterday. We had an amazing first day of this year's con, and we raised over $1,100 to charity for our fundraiser for Project Hope. So I just want to give a big thanks to everyone who both took part in the panels yesterday. We had some amazing panels, and everyone that joined us for the streams and donated. It really does mean a lot. Today's panel, this is the opening panel for day two, and it is the Great Superhero Debate, where we're going to put an array of the finest comic book experts that I know to the test and test their skills on a series of interesting debate topics, both some serious ones, some light-hearted ones, and some somewhere in the middle. Before we get into it and before I introduce all of our wonderful guests, I do want to let you know once again that this is a charity event. We are raising money for Project Hope, which is a wonderful non-profit healthcare charity. In the description of this stream and in the pinned comment in the live chat, you should find the donation link. We are giving away one of the items I wish I could enter and win the most, to be honest. We're giving away year one of the incredible graphic novel Injustice: Gods Among Us. The animated film is coming out soon, and if you haven't read the comics, I would massively recommend doing so. They are genuinely incredible books. But with all of that plugging done, let's get into the panel, and I want to introduce all of our special guests, starting with someone you definitely should know, considering he was here yesterday and all of last year. He is one of my co-founders and organizers for At Home Comic Con. It's Comic Drake. Drake, how are you?
I am extremely tired. I was out late last night. I was out late the night beforehand. So we're just continuing the theme.
Some would say you don't learn your lessons.
Listen, I got a bag full of Monster. I'm ready to run this convention. It'll be great.
That's really encouraging. We also have Ernie from Blurred Without Fear. Ernie, how are you today?
Pretty good. I too stayed up too late, but I'm managing. I'm here. I'm awake.
Okay, hoping this isn't a recurring theme here of just a lot of sleepy panelists. Garrick from Key Issues, how are you feeling today?
I am fantastic. I got a great night's sleep. Man, I slept like a baby. I'm energized and ready to go.
See, this is a true professional right here. This is someone that takes the necessary precautions. And we also have joining us one of my favorite YouTubers at the moment, someone I think is making some incredible stuff, and someone who is probably one of the most well-versed people in comics I know. It doesn't get enough of an opportunity to talk about it on the internet, I think. It's Patrick Willems. Patrick, how are you?
Hello, I'm doing great. I'm sorry that my background looks so creepy. I am in an empty room full of boxes in my parents' house where I'm visiting for the weekend. But I got a good night's sleep. I've had 2 cups of coffee. I'm feeling great.
Okay, so I feel like we can set you into teams of sleepy versus awake, or maybe we should have one sleepy person and one awake person just to kind of balance things out.
No, that's fine. Ernie and I have been vibing before the chat went live.
Yeah.
So the way this works is I have a series of questions and topics in the world of comics and comic book movies that I want to put to our esteemed panelists to debate. I will also be taking some questions from the live chat and some of the donation questions as well. So if you want to get a special question in, either pop it in the live chat or send it into the Streamlabs link that will be in the description. So the way this works is all of the debate questions are open to everyone. There are some that you might not be particularly well versed on. There's some that you might be. Everyone is willing to chime in, but if you chime in, you win a point. And you know what the points mean in this panel? Absolutely nothing, but it's pride. So I kind of want to just start and kind of get a baseline of everyone's knowledge. So I'm going to go through each panelist and ask them 2 quick questions. What is their favorite comic book of all time? And if they had to rank their knowledge of comics out of 10, what would it be? Drake, let's start with you.
Well, I am a known fan of the series Invincible. That is my all-time favorite piece of fictional media ever created. And I like to think that I know a lot about comics. If not, then I need to find a new career. Let's say like an 8.
Okay, setting a high bar. Ernie, what about you?
Oh man, favorite comic. I would probably, man, it's gonna be kind of a weird one. I like really obscure stuff, so and I'm an old 90s image head, so even though it's not that popular of a comic, I was a really big fan of Shadowhawk.
Okay.
Back in the day, very very far back in the day. But as far as knowledge, I'm gonna say a 7.
Okay. Garrett?
I know a little, but not a lot.
Okay. You know, I like how you just kind of one below Drake, so you're not setting yourself too high expectations, but there's room to surprise. Garrick, what about you?
Right. A favorite comic of all time. It's kind of hard to pick. I'm a huge Batman guy. So I probably have to say Batman Year One. I absolutely love that story, Bruce and Gordon. As far as like comic book knowledge, we'll keep going down the line. I'll say I'm a 6 and stay. I'll stay at a 6, sure.
Good call. And Patrick, what about you?
You're really starting off with a tough question. Favorite comic of all time? This is probably changed by the day, but I'm gonna say Sea Guy.
Okay.
The early 2000s Grant Morrison, Cameron Stewart miniseries that is still out of print, sadly. And knowledge, you know what? I'm also gonna say a 6. Just to be safe. Like I feel like I know a decent amount, but I know other people know so much more, and I know I have massive blind spots, so let's say a 6, be conservative.
Okay, I can work with all of this. So I think we should start off with a fun question, an easy question. Well, maybe not so much an easy question, but definitely a more lighthearted and fun one. Say the space-time continuum is destroyed in some sort of horrific cosmic event, and you are entrusted to help repair the sacred timeline, as we've seen in some of these ongoing Marvel shows. And the timeline gods say to you, right, in order to fix the universe, we could only keep one, Marvel or DC. Only one of these universes can remain, and the other one is erased from all of existence. Now, there's a lot of things to take into consideration with this topic. Obviously, the history, the impacts of different characters, the impact it's had on publishing and wider media, but you can only keep one. So I'm going to open it up to the 4 of you if anyone has an argument they want to put forward.
Man.
And okay, just to also, because we're talking like ripple effects through time here.
Yes.
And so obviously things each publisher has done have impacted the other.
Definitely. It's going to be really complicated to explain Amalgam Comics.
For sure.
Well, I don't think after that brief moment in time, Amalgam had a whole lot of like lasting effects.
Hey, I'm sure there's someone watching this that their favorite comic is Dark Claw. There's got to be at least one person that loves Dark Claw.
Dark Claw
or
was
Super
pretty
Soldier.
Cool. Yeah, Spider Boy. What? There's some good ones. But okay, but my question is, if you remove one, does their timeline still stay the same as it is?
Who knows? This is a risk you've got to take.
Now, are we talking about the publication timeline, or are we talking about the in-universe? Those are two very different questions.
Who's to say? All we know is you can only keep one. You don't know the effects it'll have on the world that we live in. You don't know how it'll affect the world that they live in. This is serious business.
Okay, well, I'll put my foot forward and say you got to get rid of Marvel. I'm sorry, but I don't know how you can live in a world of superheroes without Superman, Wonder Woman, and Batman. I mean, of course, we're going to be missing a lot from Marvel. Spider-Man, he's on the wall here, one of my favorites of all time. Of course, you have the X-Men and Captain America, the Avengers, and all that. But I mean, the Trinity, Superman kind of set the blueprint of everything. It's just hard to imagine a world without the Man of Tomorrow in it. You know what I mean? So I just gut instinct. That's probably what I would say.
Can I agree with that?
Of course.
Okay, I wasn't sure if we had to.
Yeah, I was about to say, can I also agree?
Because it's
well,
also,
I said this could be an easy one.
But like the thing, this might be a weird take, but I feel like since like the 60s since the, from Fantastic Four #1 onward, Marvel stuff was always a bit more cohesive. Like they didn't really have to reboot their universe as many times as DC. As much as they had like the bankruptcy thing in the 90s. But I feel like with DC, you get all of the ups and downs. You get all of the different eras. And then also the thing is, if we're talking like the publishing company, DC has more like really notable like single story kind of out of continuity stuff that is like the stuff that is often handed to like non-comic readers and stuff like that. And so I think you obviously you'll lose things by sacrificing Marvel, but I think you still keep so much of what is interesting about the history of comics. And then also, and this is just purely out of curiosity, I genuinely wonder what like the 21st century film landscape would look like without Marvel. And because that has clearly had a bigger impact like cinematically. And so yeah, I'd say sorry. And here's the thing, Jack Kirby still would have been hired by DC and done a bunch of cool stuff. So I think it would work out.
That's a very compelling point. Do we have any obviously I think we're in a consensus here. I was going to mention, just in the realms of comic book movies, you could make a very strong point for saying that without Superman 78, you probably don't have anything that comes after it, really.
Right.
Yeah.
That is
You definitely, like, without 78 Superman, you don't have Tim Burton's Batman, you don't have Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, and kind of everything that was inspired by that. But if you and Ernie have anything that you want to kind of throw in before we move on?
I mean, honestly, I think DC is the only real answer. They played a lot with it in a lot of the recent DC books, but like everything spins out of Superman. Like it is comic history, and pretty much a lot of the biggest moves in the entire industry all came from that. I mean, yes, like Marvel does dominate the modern film landscape, but also DC really walked so they could run.
Yeah. It's one of those things. It's a tough one for me to admit because I grew up reading DC comics, but I gravitated towards Marvel comics over the years. And as much as I don't want to live in a world where only DCEU movies exist, I like having a good cohesive movie universe. I would like to also have good comics to start with as well.
That's you got to have that kind of foundation.
Yeah, you got to start. You got to get the square one right first.
The only thing I'd say to disagree with that is I don't want to live in a world where in the top 2 comic book movies of 2016 you've got Suicide Squad.
Award-winning movie Suicide Squad.
Does Suicide Squad even
They
exist
got that
without
Oscar.
Marvel, though? Is the question.
That's the thing.
That is also
because-
true.
Yeah.
Because the whole DCEU was basically an attempt to like frantically replicate what Marvel had done. So you remove Marvel, you're not going to get like a Batman versus Superman. You're not going to get a Suicide Squad. So I think we're safe.
You know what? I like your line of thinking.
Yeah.
Somehow this has turned into a very compelling argument to
Yeah.
wow,
For
I didn't
DC.
realize Marvel was responsible for such horrors.
I mean, imagine a world where the DC cinematic universe is based on something like the stuff with Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, like because that really was like an amazing TV universe, and everything that connected extremely well, especially because it was mainly helmed by just their vision, kind of like Kevin Feige has today. So I would really love to see what DC would do if they've already had that set up in the cartoon world.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's-
talking movies, the past 20-ish years would be so different because like without Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man, there would not be the boom of superhero movies that has dominated the past, just the 21st century.
That's fair.
So the Warner Brothers still would have rebooted Batman and probably Superman, but I don't think this genre would be as dominant as it is, and things would just be different. So again, it's a great what if scenario.
It is. An interesting thing to raise here is you talked about, Patrick, about the idea of, the likes of Jack Kirby still going over to DC and doing stuff. Who's to say that the likes of, when Joe Simon and Jack Kirby went to DC, who's to say the likes of Stan Lee couldn't have ended up there as well? We could feasibly still get some similar characters to what we ended up getting.
Or Stan would have finally written that great American novel that he always talked about.
Maybe.
Yeah, I disagree that Stan would ever go to DC. I mean, he was only really brought into the industry through nepotism since his uncle owned the publishing company, and Stan didn't even want to get into comic books. He only did it out of necessity. Meanwhile, like somebody like Jack Kirby was already like deep in the trenches and was even moonlighting over at National Allied Publications. So honestly, we'd probably have just a complete comic landscape without Stan Lee's input at all.
Right.
And you're saying this is a good thing, Drake?
Listen, I mean, the amount that Stan Lee actually contributed is already a subject of debate. So who knows how much would actually change?
Okay, I'll take that. So I think we're on consensus. We're going with DC here,
Right.
which
Yeah.
officially christens you all on Twitter as Marvel haters. So
Which
that
is
is
funny because
something-
I'm the Marvel shill, supposedly.
no, you're
But
also a
now
DC show.
it's being revealed that we've been paid off by
Yeah.
by Warner's and to say this.
Ah, I see. That makes a lot
I'll
of
go
sense.
change to my Joker suit.
So the next question I want to ask, sticking with this kind of Marvel versus DC focus, I want to talk about comic book movies, and specifically, I want to kind of talk about two of my favorites. One from Marvel, one from DC. Ones that are not connected into the kind of big cinematic universes today, but two that I think are massively influential in kind of progressing the medium of comic book movies forward. And similar rules apply here. It's kind of both what is your favorite, which one do you think is best, but if you could only keep one, what would it be? The Marvel choice is going to be Spider-Man 2, which it's a sequel, so you kind of have, well, technically they're both sequels. So you've got 2004 Spider-Man 2, and then you have 2008's The Dark Knight.
I knew
Only
you were
one
gonna do
can
this.
remain.
I mean, I can start off again, and I will say this with no shame. The Dark Knight is my favorite movie of all time, let alone favorite comic book movie of all time. I'll say that The Dark Knight is really what got me into comic books in the first place. It got me so interested in the characters. I mean, I grew up watching Batman the Animated Series and the Spider-Man cartoon, and Static Shock was one of my favorite shows, the Teen Titans, of course. But The Dark Knight, when I saw that in the theater, it just blew me away to the point where I was like, I don't want this movie to end. I need to learn more about this character. And I went out and I bought Batman Year One trades. I bought The Killing Joke. I got, into the DC universe in a way that I probably never would have before. So for me personally, it would be The Dark Knight, although I do love Spider-Man 2 as well.
Okay. Anyone willing to stand up and defend Sam Raimi's masterpiece?
I mean, the thing that okay, I should say right now, I haven't decided on an answer yet. But this is really like breaking my brain, just getting into the ripple effects of it, because I love both these movies. But The Dark Knight, I think, had both a positive and negative aspect on cinema. For the one thing, if you don't have The Dark Knight, then you don't get pretty much all of the Christopher Nolan movies after that, because that basically like guaranteed that was like his guarantor to get his blank check to do Inception and Interstellar and everything. He made $1 billion movie and he could do whatever he wanted after that. And I like so many of those movies. And so I'm like, I don't want to lose those. But then also you get all of the movies, everything from James Bond movies to Star Trek movies to all of these things, basically just sort of like ripping off the Dark Knight in various ways. Often it's just the trope of like the villain lets themselves be captured and in the middle of the movie. But that became the thing everyone was chasing for so long, to which I'm not sure was the best thing. And Spider-Man 2, while being massively successful, I'm not sure did have, other than like just being another big successful like Marvel adaptation, I don't think it quite had like the ripple effects of like just changing the course of like popular cinema. And so this is all a long way of saying, I'm not sure. Actually, wait. Okay, I've made up my mind. I'm going to lose Spider-Man 2 and it kills me. But because I'm just going to say, because then I feel like Raimi's bad experience with Spider-Man 3 kind of like burnt him out a bit. And maybe we would have just gotten more. We've gotten so few Sam Raimi movies in the past like 15 years, and that kills me. And I'm almost like, maybe he would have made more. I'm sure Marvel would still be fine because there were other things happening. And so yeah, I'm gonna lose Spider-Man 2, and it hurts to say that.
See, you took a point I was going to raise for you all, but you took it in a very different way. My logic was maybe you don't want to lose Spider-Man 2 because Raimi doesn't have as many kind of films, especially in the turn of the millennium, as Nolan does. So my thought process was losing probably one of his 3 best films and taking that away. You're losing a lot. Your point is saying maybe he would continue and be more prolific later on. That's quite an interesting take.
Yeah, because I think if before he made the first Spider-Man, he had a really interesting 90s run with everything from like Darkman to The Quick and the Dead to A Simple Plan to like even I think maybe his worst movie, For Love of the Game, the Kevin Costner baseball movie. And he was like all over the map. And so I'm like, what if we got another decade like that, where he was doing like horror movies, action movies, small dramas, that kind of thing? I think Raimi would be fine. I even wonder, would he have, because like he like, you know, started out like working with the Coen brothers. I'm like, would he have had like a more Coen brothers type career if he had not spent all this time doing franchise movies?
So do you think in a way kind of Nolan needed the success of Batman to launch himself as like a Hollywood blockbuster director more so than kind of Raimi needed it?
Yes, because look, you know, Nolan does The Dark Knight, and then he like contractually makes a third Batman movie, but then he's just like has an like absolute free reign to make whatever he wants with full creative control. And like you're not getting Interstellar, you're not getting Dunkirk, you're not getting Tenet. Like if it's not for The Dark Knight, this is all because he made The Dark Knight, and then then because they let him make Inception because of that. And then that was a surprise blockbuster. Inception would not exist otherwise. And that really, like when that was a hit, then it was just like, sure, Chris, do whatever you want. And I think, and he's one of the very few directors who can work on that scale with that kind of freedom. And I think that's a really important thing to have, as much as like, you know, Hollywood has become like increasingly risk averse. And so I think it's important to have like a Nolan there doing his thing. So that's why I'm going with this.
Interesting. Does anyone else have any counterclaims? Maybe anyone want to argue the other way?
Go ahead, Ernie.
No, I was just gonna say a point that Patrick brought up was, you know, Hollywood's obsession with the dark, gritty story. They took the wrong lessons from The Dark Knight. They took a lot of bad lessons from The Dark Knight, just the dark story aside, but the way action scenes are shot. Like I always tell people, once upon a time I watched a side thing that, you know, Christian Bale said, hey, I went to this class and learned Eskrima for like 9 months, and it's like couldn't tell because I couldn't see it. The whole like switching the camera like every like half or quarter second became something that everybody's like, oh, that Dark Knight movie was really great. Do that. Do more of that. Make it, just put the camera everywhere so people are confused. They have no clue what's happening. And take those two things combined. It's just like those are two things that literally plagued my movie going experiences for so long that I can't say The Dark Knight. I would give it to Raimi.
I will say, I think the way fight scene shot that way is totally a product of the Bourne movies.
That too, yeah.
And so like that's still gonna happen either way.
Yeah.
I mean, Nolan did
say,
fair
point.
Nolan did say when he was making the films that he shot the fight scenes that way to make it seem like Batman was, you know, so fast and taking these guys out that you just couldn't believe it. That was like his explanation for the scene, and specifically Batman Begins, when he takes out all those guys, and that's like his first real scene as Batman. There's a bunch of quick cuts like that to kind of display that Batman was like this superhuman person that, you know, the people that he was fighting were just as confused as the audience, I guess, as to what actually happened. So I guess he did that in a way to make the character, I guess, more scary to the underground, or make him feel more impactful to the audience. I don't know how successful it was, but, you know, that's what he said.
Me.
That's what he said. So I mean,
confused.
Man, I don't have much of a compelling argument to defend Spider-Man 2, because I know the objective right answer is The Dark Knight should stay. I mean, Patrick led just an amazing case for it. Like Spider-Man 2, I don't think had as much of an impact on the film landscape, and like The Dark Knight also led to things like the Arkham series of video games, which I absolutely love. But man, I just like Spider-Man 2 more. It's a good, happy, feel-good movie, and I as much as I like grim and dark storylines, I just love the feel good stuff about hope and perseverance and stuff. And Spider-Man has always represented that, especially in a post 9/11 world. Like, I mean, Spider-Man 1 hit exactly when we needed it. And I think Spider-Man 2 just kind of continued that. I mean, that scene of all of the New Yorkers banding together, it gets me every time.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that's kind of the thing with especially the first two Raimi Spider-Man films. They're not just great comic book movies. They're like some of the all-time great New York films as well. I know, Patrick, that's something you've talked about in videos in the past, that it kind of does more than transcend like the genre of itself, and kind of has that, especially given the context and when it was made, includes that collective spirit in a really necessary way.
It's true. Yeah. I mean, literally a week ago, I met up with a friend. Like I live in New York City. I met up with the friends to go to the movies, and we got there a bit early. So we just like walked around for a while around the city and just had like a half-hour conversation about how much we love the like tiny little characters in the Raimi movies, like Mr. Ditkovich and stuff like that. And just about how much they matter to like building this sense of like community and this world of like these average normal people within New York. And it feels like a cohesive world. And I mean, look, like now that I saw this movies like years before I moved to New York. And now like having lived there for a while, I'm like, oh yeah, no, they really nailed it in a lot of ways. Whether it's like, Spider-Man 2 is one of the only movies ever made that actually has what feels like an authentic New York apartment, as in it sucks and it's tiny. And yeah, and just like, and all of the other Spider-Man movies since then have not captured like the vibe of the city in the same way, which is funny because it's not like Raimi is from New York. This isn't like Scorsese or anything like that. He's from the Midwest, but he really did it. And things like Spider-Man 2, I think, is the best superhero movie ever made. I really do, and which is why it killed me to say that's the one I remove.
Wow. I mean, when you're saying it's the best ever made and you're still kind of binning it, Drake's there wearing a Spider-Man suit and he's still saying to get rid of it. Like,
Yeah.
that's damning. I can't believe you're doing this to one of my all-time favorite films.
Why are you put us in this position?
This is a bad debate panel. We all agree.
Maybe we can kind of spruce it up a little bit and get a little more contentious. You know what? Yeah, let's ask the question that will set Twitter ranging then on the subject of Spider-Man. Who's the best live-action Spider-Man? You've got three choices.
Spider-Man or Peter Parker?
You know what? Both are included. You have to factor both in.
I honestly have to go with Tom Holland. I mean, it's been said to death, but like Andrew Garfield Spider-Man was like really good whenever he's in the costume. Tobey Maguire does a really good Peter Parker. I think Tom Holland does. He's more like average at both. He's really good in both roles, but I don't know. I honestly think a lot of the problems with Tom Holland's Spider-Man is that he's not really given a lot of the space to play as Peter Parker so much because he's thrown into these big larger than life events. He's become more of Iron Boy where he's having to pick up after Tony's trash. But I think if given a chance to actually tell a Spider-Man movie through and through, I think he could really shine in the role.
Great. I love Holland's portrayal of Spider-Man. I think he is really kind of come into his own in his solo films and especially in the last two. But I think you can't escape the fact that, it's just for me personally, while I enjoy Homecoming and there's elements of Far From Home that I enjoy, that movie doesn't do a whole lot for me. They don't kind of feel as much like Spider-Man to me as maybe some of the other iterations. And while I don't blame any of that on Holland's performance, I think he's fantastic. It's hard to kind of remove the writing of the character, of that version of the character from the performance itself. I think that is kind of important context. Not to kind of sway anyone in any debates, but there are issues I have with Holland's Spider-Man that maybe the other two versions do really well and vice versa. Does anyone have any counter arguments?
The writing thing is what I keep getting into as well, because like I remember being really excited when they cast Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, and I still, I mean, and clear, like, we've all seen the Comic-Con clip where he's in the costume and like he clearly cares so deeply about it, and he's such a good actor. And just the fact that they basically wrote that Spider-Man as like a selfish dick for two movies. Yeah. Like the part at the end of Amazing Spider-Man 1, when he's just made a promise to a dying man that he's like, the guy asked one thing of him. He's like, just please stay away from my daughter because I don't want her life put at risk, because of her proximity to you. And he's like, sure, you got it. And the movie ends with him,
Nothing happened
being
to
like,
her.
you know what? The best promises are the ones you can't keep. And then she dies. He's just like, and the thing is, he's really well cast. He's doing so much work to try to make the material work, but it's just a poorly written version of the character. And it's the thing where, like, I remember when Holland showed up in Civil War, I'm like, this is the Spider-Man, like, with the right personality and who looks the right age that I've wanted to see my whole life. And then as a few movies kind of go on, and I'm just like, stop talking about Mr. Stark and just go, like, I don't know, stop a bank robbery or something, or and like the Iron Boy thing has frustrated me as well, but I'm like, that's not Holland's fault. That's and so weirdly, it's like I feel like I've noticed, especially with like the release of the trailer to No Way Home and like just this outpouring of love for the Raimi movies and this sort of like reappreciation of them. And people complained about Tobey Maguire for years, and about how he's not funny enough and all those things. He cries too much. But now it's just a thing of like, you kind of look at him and especially in the first two movies, and it's like, that's like the best written version of Spider-Man that we've had in terms of like being like truest to what we think of as the character. And which is why this question is so Owen, do you have, are we removing writing and going solely performance, or is it all factoring?
I don't know if you can, because I think the thing with, I rewatched both of the Andrew Garfield movies recently because they are ones that I kind of have pushed out of my mind a little bit and wanted to kind of give them a reappraisal. And I think that while they probably are the most like mixed up characterizations at times, I think that they have two of the strongest dynamics in any of the Spider-Man films, which is the relationship between Peter and Gwen, I think is quite by far the best kind of romance in any of the Spider-Man films, but also the relationship between Peter and Aunt May. Obviously, Rosemary Harris is incredible in the original films, but I think Sally Field's portrayal of Aunt May and the chemistry that she has with Andrew Garfield, especially in the second film, which, because there's so much going on in that movie, you kind of forget about the kind of the subplots with Peter and Aunt May. But I think they have a really kind of genuine dynamic, and you really feel that it's kind of those two against the world in a way that, like I said, while I think Marissa Tomei's fantastic and I think Rosemary Harris is iconic, I feel like the relationship that Andrew Garfield Spider-Man has with Aunt May offers something a bit more kind of, it's a very relatable relationship.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, they're all really well cast. Like the two Webb movies are, they got a really good cast to do all of that. It's like I think with like the Peter and Gwen stuff, it's like I think a lot of it is like not especially well written, but I think like Garfield and Stone are just so good and have such good chemistry that they like make it work. They kind of make it work despite itself.
Yeah.
And you know what? I know that the rules are so nebulous for this. I'm gonna say Maguire just because that including the writing and all of it, but like that vision of Peter Parker and Spider-Man as a guy who like every time one thing goes well for him, like three things set him back, and he's just, and like the constant struggle of all of it, and like how like the portrayal of like being Spider-Man being this like really difficult, usually not rewarding job that he just has to keep doing. It rings so true to me, and it's the one that I come back to the most, even if like Holland is a bit closer to like my mental image of like Spider-Man's personality. I'm gonna go Maguire.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'm gonna go with Garfield, if for no other reason than like I always felt like I like Tom Holland, don't get me wrong, great guy, does a good job with what he's given, but and as much as I like Maguire, I always felt like whenever he was in costume as Spider-Man, his voice was so like not superhero-ish.
Yeah.
It like it was like, hi, I'm Spider-Man. Like, I couldn't get with it. And like, I know a lot of people. I remember one of the biggest complaints about Andrew Garfield when the web movies came out was that he was an asshole. But that's what Spider-Man is.
Yeah, and I was going to say a thing about that. It's like, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, especially in the first movie where he's he's in high school, he's a teenager. He is an arsehole. But what teenager isn't?
Yeah. Well, he's also a jerk to like people. People were actually sad for his enemies, and I was like, why?
I mean, that's why they hate
I
him
feel
so
bad
much.
for Electro. I mean,
Yeah.
Electro's just a guy that's just trying to get through his life, and
It was his birthday. He was trying to light his candles.
he just likes Spider-Man. And
Spider-Man forgot him.
He was really channeling those like Jim Carrey, Riddler from Batman Forever vibes. Like
It's the same
obsession.
story.
There is like a special category of comic book movie villains that's like Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, Jim Carrey's Riddler, Kristen Wiig's Cheetah, and then like Jamie Foxx's Electro.
Yeah, you put them all together, like it's literally the same. It's the same thing, but like I actually remember people saying like, "Dude, why is Spider-Man, being mean to that guy who's stealing a car?" It's like Spider-Man's not nice. He talks smack to people. That's his superpower. Forget the fact that he got bit by a radioactive spider. The guy got bit by a radioactive jerk. That's what he does. That's what he does. Like, how do you think Spider-Man beats the Juggernaut? It's because he talks smack to him and gets him out of his head and makes him start doubting himself. Like, I even remember, I think that was one of the last issue that Dan Slott wrote. Like, Spider-Man admitted to being a bully. It was like, that's what you are. You bully your opponents, and that's how you get the upper hand. It's not a bad thing. I think Andrew Garfield has displayed that better than any other actor. Like when in suit, his Peter Parker might not be the best, but like I feel like I don't know. I just want my guy in the suit to be good. Tom Holland, he's a good smack talker when he's Spider-Man, but I almost feel like it's, I don't know. It's still Iron Boy to me. Yeah, it's less Spider-Man and Iron. I feel like he's channeling Tony Stark more than he's channeling Peter Parker sometimes.
That's fair. And Ernie, I think you make a wonderful point. I mean, they talk about it in the Spider-Man comics, but like the reason his villains hate him so much is that not only is he beating them within an inch of life, but he's just making fun of them the entire time. Like Dr. Octopus hates his guts. And I think that you're totally right. Andrew Garfield really, really channels that.
I just want to point attention to someone in the live chat. You were talking about kind of feeling sorry for the Spider-Man villains in Garfield's films. Someone in the live chat just said, all he wanted to do was turn people into lizards.
What's so wrong with that? I mean, the guy was ambitious,
He had goals.
If I had to rank them, I would say based on everything, performance, writing, all of it put together, I would say Tobey's probably my number one, with Tom. If he just gets a little bit better material, I 100% agree with Patrick. If they kept that same energy that they did in Civil War with the character, I think he could have been far and away the best and given him, I guess, a little more personal stakes in his films instead of tying him so much to Iron Man. But I gotta be honest, Andrew is a distant third for me. Like I love Andrew Garfield, but I just don't like his Spider-Man at all. And I say it's probably 99% the writing. Like he is a jerk. And I think all three of the Spider-Men have jerkish tendencies when they're fighting against their villains. But Andrew's he takes it too far sometimes. I feel like when he was fighting Electro for the first time in Times Square, like Electro was legitimately like concerned. He didn't know what was going on. He was confused. And Spider-Man at the beginning tried to help him out. But by the end, he's blasting with the hose. He's joking around with the firefighters. And it's like, I just didn't get it. And in the first movie, he's like, he has this crazy argument with Gwen's dad, Captain Stacy, at dinner. And he's just, I don't know. He's not channeling Peter Parker or really Spider-Man for me.
The only thing I'd contest with that is talking about how Andrew may be the biggest jerk. I don't know. In Spider-Man 3, Tobey has his moments. Like that scene in the bar that MJ works at. Like I know obviously there's the fact of the symbiote, but like, I don't know. He's a pretty big dick.
But he's
Yeah.
only a dick when he's like possessed by an alien.
Mhm.
That's true.
Andrew's just his Peter's just he's like that. I don't know.
I feel like that's the thing. It's like it's not like I'm totally cool with Garfield Spider-Man being like a dick to supervillains,
Mhm.
but I feel like he is like when he's Peter Parker, he's like consistently extremely like self-absorbed and
Mhm.
like just like a dick to just like the people in his life.
Mhm.
To a degree that like again I mentioned the thing about like him literally the first movie ending with him like breaking the promise he made to a guy who died, and I'm just like that is like fundamentally not a Peter Parker I'm on board with,
That
and this
makes
is
a lot of
no
sense.
fault of the actor at all.
Right.
Can that not be blamed on the lack of kind of strict moral life lessons that Uncle Ben gave him in that film? You know, it was such a complicated kind of mantra to pass on to him that, you know, when you have the capability to do good things, that means you have a moral obligation to do those things. Like, how
I
can
mean,
anyone be expected to follow such a moral code?
I will say a thing that has always driven me nuts about that movie is it's been a while since I've seen it, but just to check, he never actually catches Uncle Ben's killer, right?
I
I
can't
just watched them
remember.
like 2 weeks ago. I don't think he does.
Yeah.
Because this is the thing that has always driven me nuts since I first saw Amazing Spider-Man 1. So, Spider-Man Origin, you know, when he catches Uncle Ben's killer, he realizes this is the guy that I let get away. I could have stopped this, and therefore, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. In that movie, he never catches that guy, thus learning the final important part of the lesson. He just starts chasing after criminals trying to find a specific guy and then ends up like, you know, fighting the lizard. But there's not like for me, the most like fundamentally important point in the whole Spider-Man origin arc does not happen in the movie.
Mhm.
And that was what just kind of like really broke it for me.
I mean, to an extent, I would agree with that. But then you also make the point that, you know, in the Holland films, they don't even touch on that aspect of the character entirely.
Mhm.
Well, because they're not doing an origin movie.
But yeah, but true. But I feel like that's an entire kind of subset of Peter's character that hasn't been even like addressed at all.
I will say, I think the scene in Civil War,
Yeah.
when he first meets with Tony, where again they're making a point of not rehashing the exact same stuff we've already seen before, but I feel like the way he lays out his kind of like his justification for doing this and why it's important to him, to me, it's like it's like in the subtext there. Like
Yeah.
I got that he had learned that lesson.
That's fair.
So
That's fair.
but that's just me. Again,
Okay,
Spider-Man is a complicated subject
That's true.
that people have feelings about.
I mean, if we
Strong
want to boil it
feelings.
down to a really trivial level, we can even just go off who has the coolest costume.
Mhm.
And I feel like Andrew Garfield has both the best and worst Spider-Man costume.
Yes,
So you've really got the highs and lows there.
best in two, right?
No, I love the basketball suit with the sunglasses. I joke. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 suit is a thing of beauty, and that is kind of the sole reason I wish we got an Amazing Spider-Man 3. Not so I could see more of Paul Giamatti as the Rhino, as great as that is.
I
that was so
love Paul
weird.
Giamatti as the Rhino. I gotta say, I don't like that movie, but when Giamatti is there with that accent, that's cinema.
Now, Owen, I am going to cut you off before you go to the next question because I want to point out that we have now hit 25% of our goal with $1,263. And just a quick reminder that anybody that does donate will be entered to get the Injustice Gods Among Us Year 1, which is an incredible comic. So please, if you're willing and able, we have donation links in the chat. We have them in the description of the video as well.
Yes, please do, everyone. Like I said, if we can hit 1,300 during this panel, that would be amazing. And you will get the chance to win some amazing comics. So definitely go and do that. Okay, let's stay in the realm of comic book movies, because I think an interesting thing that was brought up during the debates for that question was the importance of comic book accuracy in films and like how beholden to the source material of a movie should be. And I feel like that's a question, and that's kind of a topic that gets banded about a lot with different iterations, especially when we're getting to a point now where we've had multiple different takes of kind of the major characters. Of how important is it for a comic book movie to kind of be beholden to the source material, whether it's just kind of the tenets of the character generally, or if they're adapting a specific story, how important it is to kind of present that story in the most accurate way? I don't know. What do you all think?
Personally, I
Uh,
think it really depends on the character and the story that you're telling. I think that a lot of people have, I guess it would be the audience's perception of the character. Like everyone's going to have much higher expectations for Batman or Superman or Spider-Man than they would the Eternals. So I feel like you have a lot more freedom with the Eternals to do whatever you want, as opposed to, all right, Batman, he can't kill, he has X, Y, and Z, you have great responsibility with Spider-Man, all of these things playing a major role in the character, whereas the lesser known characters, I feel like they kind of have more freedom to do what they want because people don't care as much. I personally don't care that much as long as the core values of the character are there and you're telling an interesting story. I think having the writers and the directors and the creatives take the character in a direction that they feel is important, and they tell a good story, I think that's paramount above 100% comic book accuracy.
I would agree. I would agree with that. For me, like when it comes to characters, yeah, you can kind of remix certain characters. There's certain things you can do, like, oh, especially if it's something we've seen before, like case of Batman. I don't need to see Martha Wayne's pearls hitting the floor
And
every
ultra
movie.
slow-mo.
Yeah, ultra slow-mo. I don't need that. And I'll even to bring back Spider-Man into this, like I don't need to see Uncle Ben get shot every like few years. I don't need that. I don't that's triggering for me. I don't need it. But when it comes, so when it comes to, especially if it's a well-known, even with well-known characters, I make case for well-known characters, you can go around certain things. Maybe we don't need to rehash someone like a character like Superman, Spider-Man, Batman. We don't need to rehash their origin. People should, for the most part, probably know it, even if they don't really follow comics. The area where I would even say if you're talking about like storylines, I think you can even get crazier with storylines, like, and we've seen people do this already, but like I always tell people, it's the Sin City effect. I don't need the movie to be 1-to-1 with the comic, because at that point, I know the story. There's no surprises. I'm literally just there to watch someone slavishly recreate the thing I read, but put it on the screen. That could be cute in some areas, like, all right, that's nice, but I really want to see you do something different with it. Surprise me. Give me something extra that I haven't seen before. That'll, because clearly at least half of, maybe probably being generous when I say half, at least a quarter of the people going to see this have already read the thing that you are adapting.
Man, I fall into a really, I don't know. I agree and I disagree on comic accuracy really meaning stuff, because like I'm a firm believer of alternate universe, alternate rules. And I think like the tone and the world that that a film or adaptation is setting up is very important. Also, there are things that do work better in the medium of comics that don't really translate to other mediums. But I also think it's really important that if you are trying to present a more honest depiction of a character, that you get the core of it right. But also, like stuff like Watchmen, it was a very good recreation of the comic, but also it didn't feel like it actually was communicating the same message and the same soul of it. But then also, I'm a big fan of Invincible. The animated series is phenomenal, and I think it's just as good as the comic. They do make significant changes that works for the way that they're presenting the story, and also Robert Kirkman has taken the time to update and modernize the storytelling. And so I think that they both accomplish the same overall story, but in a different way. And I find them both equally entertaining for different reasons.
I think Invincible's a really interesting kind of one to kind of analyze, because I think unlike a lot of the other stories where they're adapting specific graphic novels, the show is being written by the person that wrote the original comic book. So you do have quite an interesting perspective there on, they are remixing it slightly, but it's based off their own experience of knowing what works and what doesn't. So you are kind of getting a fine-tuned version of it. Where, for example, say, just to kind of pick a story off the top of my head, say if Matt Reeves, after the Batman film, announces a sequel being like The Long Halloween or Dark Victory. Obviously, it's not going to be written by the people that wrote and drew the original story. So how much of that can they kind of, is there an element in which it's kind of flexible but can break at a point? Or do you think that it's kind of either a yes or no?
Have you guys seen The Boys? I'm assuming everybody's watched that show. Or have you
Yeah.
read the comics? I mean,
Yes.
I think the show is far and away much better, and the changes
is.
that they've made are very significant. And they're putting out something that I think is of much higher quality than what it's based off of, based on those changes.
The comic is a very difficult read.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah,
I
like
hear.
I love a lot of Garth Ennis stuff, but the Boys, what I've read of it is a lot of my least favorite of his traits, like right out in front.
Mhm.
But yeah, as far as the accuracy thing goes, I do think there's like at least in terms of how we feel about this, there's almost different answers, whether it's like long running Marvel and DC superheroes and then other comics, because we have like we all have our very personal like history and feelings about these superheroes that have been around for like 70 years or whatever. And so I know my answer has kind of changed over time, where especially in, let's say, like the early 2000s, after a very long time of like, Hollywood mostly not caring too much about like authenticity or about like, doing like a faithful adaptation. You look back at like the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie where he doesn't even have a skull on his shirt, which seems like the easiest thing to do.
The bare
It's not even
minimum,
like
at
a
least.
this isn't even like a Wolverine in a spandex yellow costume. It's just like but they're just like, no, we know better. And so for so long, I was just like, I just want it to look like the comics, like the stuff I know. And then I got all that. Like, we got so many movies where the characters like looked just like they did the stuff that we thought we'd never see on screen. And then we got stuff like, Zack Snyder's Watchmen, which I remember when it was being talked about and he was like, oh yeah, I just used the comic as a storyboard and it's like every single thing shot for shot. And then I got that and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, it's that, but also it doesn't really have much to say other than we love Watchmen. And look, we did everything. And now that I've kind of like, I guess Hollywood kind of like whet my appetite that I had for so long, and I got to see all of like the characters looking like I wanted them to look and mostly feeling like I wanted them to on screen. At this point, I guess I've just gotten older and I'm like, okay, I kind of look at these now the way I look at like if a novel I like is being adapted. And it's like, I don't just need to see the exact thing recreated in a new medium. I'm like, I want like a filmmaker's take on something. Like I have come to like appreciate the Ang Lee Hulk from 2003 much more than I did at the time, just because, you know what? Yeah, it's not, most of it is not super accurate to the comics, but it was an interesting filmmaker using that material and doing a take on it and using it to tell a story that he wanted to tell. And that to me is like very interesting. That said, I still like, I'm a total hypocrite here because I'll never forget having my heart utterly broken by Man of Steel because it came along and I was just like, no, this is not what Superman does. I refuse to accept it. It is I have a hard line about ways this character must be presented, and this broke them for me, and I'm not on board. And so it's a complicated, thorny issue. In general, I've become less concerned about source material accuracy as I've gotten older, but there are still like certain things with certain characters that I'll always care about. And I'll always get a little bit of glee when I see like, some new thing where it's like, oh man, they did the moment that I know from that comic so well. It's like, there it is on screen. So yeah, it's a complicated thing.
I will say an interesting thing about what you just raised there, Patrick, is that kind of the idea of recreating those iconic moments. I think it's one thing to recreate the moment, and it's another thing to recreate what the moment means. A big example for me is, Kevin Feige said years and years before he was running the MCU that his favorite all-time Spider-Man moment was from the JMS Spider-Man run, where Aunt May discovers that Peter's Spider-Man, and they have that incredible issue, The Conversation. And Kevin Feige said, I think this is like when he was still producing the original X-Men films, that it was his dream to bring that moment to screen one day. And obviously we get a very similar moment at the end of Spider-Man Homecoming, but you could argue it doesn't have the same impact it did in the comics. There's the repercussions in the next movie aren't as severe as what kind of went on in the original comic book story. So I think it is an interesting thing to say. It's one thing to have those moments, but if those moments don't mean the same thing, then they're just kind of there as empty fan service.
Yeah, like I'm thinking of I was very frustrated with the second season of the Daredevil show on Netflix, because I like most people, I really love the original Elektra saga from the Frank Miller run, and in different ways than the 2003 Daredevil movie, they tried to basically adapt the Elektra saga, and it wasn't just that like I wasn't annoyed because, oh, they didn't do things exactly like they happened in the original comic, but it was like, they still built to a point where, Elektra gets killed with her own weapon, just like in the original comic, except it was stripped of the meaning that moment did. It wasn't, I wasn't annoyed because like a different character did it than in the comic. I was annoyed because it was a totally like a throwaway character that didn't really mean anything, and it didn't have the same repercussions, and it seemed like an attempt to be like to do a moment that we'd recognize, but without giving it the meaning and significance. It just felt like a kind of I guess a misunderstanding of why this stuff worked originally, and just not even a case of like it wasn't exactly like it was when I read it, but just of it didn't seem like an especially good adaptation of the story in general. Yeah. And yeah, I do know what you mean.
That's really interesting. And I think that I'm just kind of thinking about characters that have been adapted, specifically villains, and how they've been changed. Obviously, like there's one that brings to mind for me is the Mandarin in the MCU. Obviously, with Shang-Chi, we've now had two different versions of the Mandarin, and both of them are wildly different from the comic book villain. Both the original kind of one from Iron Man 3 with Ben Kingsley, and then the villain of Shang-Chi. They're both not particularly like the Iron Man's kind of greatest foe from the comics and the animated shows. And yet, I remember when Iron Man 3 came out and there was a lot of controversy around what they did with kind of the fake out with Ben Kingsley's character, him not actually being the Mandarin. And I think that there was a genuine outrage of people wanting to see, the quintessential Iron Man villain played by such an incredible actor going toe-to-toe with Robert Downey Jr. But I think with that, I kind of always come back to the question, does that work because the character we get isn't the character people expected from the source material, or does it not work in the context of the story, or does it? And people are just kind of upset for the wrong reasons. I don't know.
I think one of the biggest examples of that and characters being changed and people latching on to the changes and accepting them for what they are is the Joker. I mean, you have so many different live action versions of the Joker, and I think most people like almost all of them, from the live action Batman series to Jack Nicholson's Joker to Heath Ledger's Joker to Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, and then you also have Jared Leto's Joker. Every one is so wildly different from the other, and also so wildly different from the source material. But despite that, the majority of them work within the context of the TV or movie that they're in. So I think that's probably the best example of, the creatives behind, the camera making good decisions for what works in the movie instead of adapting one-to-one.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, were like kind of understandably a little bit apprehensive when like the first images of Heath Ledger Joker came out, and it's like, wait, it's just makeup? He didn't fall in a vat of acid? But that's the origin. And then the movie comes out and it's like, well, no, it's like it's such a compelling version of the character that still also, like, despite like essentially cosmetic changes, the core there of like what he represents and his ideology still seems true to like what we would hope to see. And so we realize that these kind of like these surface level things don't really matter that much. And for instance, I think it's a much more significant change to like in the '89 movie, to have, Joker be the guy who murdered Thomas and Martha Wayne.
Right.
That matters a lot more than whether or not he, puts makeup on his face. And that's also one where I'm just like, honestly, if I saw the '89 movie for the first time now, that would probably piss me off. But because I grew up watching it from like a very early age, I just have always accepted it. And that is also just one of those occasions of like, it being the '80s and Hollywood just being like, well, we're making an action movie, and so the hero has to have it has to be like a revenge thing where he has to have a personal connection to the villain, even though, this has not been how it's been done in the comics for, at that point, 50 years. We know better, and we're gonna do it this way. So yeah, that would annoy me now, but and I think that one is just that's a really significant change.
Yeah. I think with the '89 film, I think that change does work in the context of the film, but I don't think it's something you could do now per se. If you kind of view it without any context and just watch it as a story, I think it works. But knowing kind of we've got more faithful adaptations later on that adapt Joe Chill and the other versions of the Killer, I think, yeah.
And especially because they also just literally kill the Joker at the end. And so, the idea of just like introducing and then immediately killing off like the biggest of all villains now seems absurd to us, because it's like, no, you've got to do like 20 more stories with that character.
Yeah.
So again, it was a different time, a different medium. Things worked differently back then.
Yeah, that's fair. I do want to just kind of announce that we are going to be announcing the winner of the raffle soon. Just kind of refreshing the fundraiser to see where we're up to now. It's just refreshing. We've hit $1,363. Thank you so much, everyone. Like I said, we'll be announcing the winner of the Injustice Volume 1, Year 1. I think there's a couple of volumes to Year 1. It's great.
Yeah, it's 2.
Yeah, and it's 2 excellent volumes, I might add. We'll be announcing the winner of that very shortly, but there are going to be more and more kind of awesome giveaways in the later panels for today. So to be in a chance of winning more of the awesome prizes we've got, make sure to send your donations in. We do have a question from Roscoe Gorse. Before that, I do want to announce that we have the winner of the giveaway. It is Sophie M. So congratulations, Sophie. A round of applause for you. Do get in contact with either myself, Drake, or Matt Draper, either on Twitter, or email at homecomiccon@gmail.com, and we will get your details and make sure that we send that to you. Thank you so much, and congratulations.
Oh, and I will say before you get into the next conversation topic, since we are running a little bit short on time, so we have 10 minutes, so let's try not to be too long. I'm trying to run a tight ship on the scheduling.
It's okay. I had one more question I wanted to ask, but we do have a fan submitted question that, from my perspective, I don't think it'd be much of a difficult question, but you never know. Roscoe asks, I think it'll be a fairly easy one, but if you had to stop one from ever making comics, Stan Lee or Jack Kirby?
I mean, it's Jack Kirby. There's no real issue there. Like I said earlier, it's still debatable how much Stan Lee did. I mean, I'm not one of those people that say that Stan Lee is a hack that stole everything, but there's definitely a big sign that once Jack Kirby left, Stan stopped making a whole lot of stuff. He really shined well whenever he was working with Kirby. He was really good at building off of other people's ideas. Meanwhile, Kirby was just a visionary artist. I said it on Twitter before, but like when you first start getting into comics, you're a big Stan Lee fan. And then once you get into the hobby, you're a Jack Kirby fan.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I am Jack Kirby is one of my all-time favorite artists and writers. I adore him. I made a documentary about him this year, how much I love him. But I think to play devil's advocate, that you could make the argument of well, what did they do without the other? Mm-hmm. Obviously, Jack had preceded Lee with the creation of Captain America and a lot of the Golden Age Marvel history, a lot of the Golden Age Marvel characters. And then he goes to DC and does the New Gods, Mr. Miracle, and Forever People, and he introduces the Fourth World. And while today that's an incredibly significant part of the DC universe, you'd have to remember at the time those books weren't incredibly well received. Most of them were cancelled after kind of 2 years. And when Kirby left DC in, I think it was 1975, he was kind of considered a failure. I told the story in my short documentary that there were people within DC that referred to him as Jack the Hack, saying that whatever he'd had at Marvel, he didn't have at DC. And I don't agree with that. I love Kirby, and I think there is a lot more to the Fourth World books than were kind of realized at the time. But I think that's an interesting point to raise, that like whether or not you can question Lee's involvement, he created a lot of big characters at Marvel in that period, even without Kirby, whereas Kirby struck out on his own. Maybe that's because of the other collaborators Lee worked with, whereas Kirby went completely solo. I don't know. I just think it's an interesting question to raise.
Yeah, so I mean, if there's no Kirby, but like, is Lee still working with Ditko?
Well, that's it. You still got the likes of Ditko, Bill Everett, a lot of the other kind of John Romita.
Yeah, no, I'm still gonna keep Kirby. It would be very different. We'd probably have a less like tight, cohesive Marvel universe, but I still think we'd still get so much good stuff over the years. Like he still would have made a ton of comics.
Yeah.
And I think that and we would all benefit from those. So yeah. Also, it'd just be interesting to see what's a world without Stan Lee.
I would keep Kirby. Yeah.
Okay.
I have no backup for that. Just everybody's made very compelling arguments. I love Stan Lee. Guys, salt of the earth, I imagine, but yeah.
Does this mean
Kirby was the guy.
Does this mean we could live in a world where we have like Jack Kirby cameos in movies? Because
Every movie he punches a Nazi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That means every movie would have to include a Nazi, and I'm not about that.
No, we don't want just have him just punch a random bad person. Just like
I'm just gonna say, just punch a random person.
Get out of here.
Just in the background of every big fight scene, there's just Jack Kirby uppercutting someone.
Well, you get that, that it makes that whole Amazing Spider-Man Lizard fight scene in the library with Stan Lee like makes it different, because Jack Kirby just would have jumped in and been like, wait a minute, there's something going on here. Let me get this guy.
I mean, in a world with Jack Kirby, do we need a Spider-Man? I feel like Kirby's got this on lock.
We don't
Kirby,
need
man.
Spider-Man now.
That is one of my
Yeah.
favorite Stan Lee cameos, though. The one in Amazing Spider-Man.
It is really good.
Fun. This is fun.
He's just oblivious.
He's just chilling.
I feel like just based on this panel, we have like a whole season of like a what if show here, just
Right.
exploring all of these alternate realities that we've just like theorized about.
Yeah, I definitely think someone should pick us up and let us make a really expensive animated show.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, while we have 5 minutes, what is everybody's favorite Stan Lee cameo?
Am I allowed to answer this?
Yeah, dude.
I'm gonna go with Mallrats.
Mallrats. Yeah.
Okay,
I
fair enough.
love the scene with him and Jason Lee.
I'm gonna go
Okay.
with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 just because he's sitting there talking to watchers. And it just made me smile.
I think I've got to agree. That was a really clever one in the middle of a great sequence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love the Teen Titans Go one where he just shows up for his obligatory cameo.
Okay,
That is
that one rules.
I like that.
That movie's so good.
Actually, with the benefit of hindsight, no. Into the Spider-Verse, because that one makes me cry.
Oh,
That's a strong.
Yeah.
That's a
Shit,
strong
yeah.
choice.
It literally just popped in my head. So I was like, oh wait, because every time he says he's like, or I forget the exact line he says, like he's basically telling Miles like, yeah, hey, it doesn't always fit or whatever, something along those lines. I'm too busy crying. Usually.
That one's
Yeah.
that one might objectively be the best because it also captures him as kind of like the huckster salesman
Yeah.
as well, which none
that
of
is
the
like the
others ever
most
have.
Stan Lee cameo.
Yeah.
Maybe. I am now kind of thinking of what if we did get Jack Kirby cameos, and like in Zack Snyder's Justice League, we could have recreated that scene from Superman the Animated Series with
God.
Dan Turpin, the character that's kind of molded after Kirby, and his big like
Yeah.
defiant standoff against Darkseid.
Yeah. And well, hey, actually, this is actually maybe a controversial opinion, but there's a case to be made that the best Jack Kirby cameo, not that there are a lot, is in the Mark Waid, Mike Wieringo, Fantastic Four run where
Oh,
he
yeah.
is God.
Yes.
Yeah. I love that run.
Hmm.
I'm just now imagining. I will say another Stanley cameo that's come to mind is in The Simpsons, where he's in the comic book guy's shop and he's trying to put the Thing in the Batmobile.
Yeah.
And then, like, I think later in the episode, he's still in there and he's just like putting Spider-Man comics in front of DC books.
I believe the scene is like Bart comes in and goes, Stan Lee's still here? And comic book guy goes, Stan Lee never left.
Yeah.
That was good.
I also remember the time that Alan Moore had a cameo in The Simpsons. It was him, Art Spiegelman, and I can't remember who the third person was.
Stan Lee has a great cameo in Hell's Kitchen season 11. Talking about Gordon shouting at the chefs. He's like, maybe he shouldn't do that. It's
I feel like we've
pretty
learned
good.
a lot about Stan Lee here.
Yeah, he never turned down a cameo.
I mean, if only he could have kind of made it long enough to be on cameo. That would have been a nice full circle moment.
For sure.
See, there you go.
I mean, I'd love a Stan Lee cameo.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I know we need to wrap up, but like Elvis impersonators are like so old school. What I would honestly appreciate a new era of like Stan Lee impersonators.
I agree.
Yes.
Drake, I feel like you could pull off like 70 Stan Lee.
It's because you keep having me voice Stan Lee in your videos. and I
That's
do
because
this-
you do a really good or really bad Stan Lee voice.
Yeah, it's a really bad voice.
I don't know why I keep asking you. but
I don't
it
either.
happens.
Well, I think that's a good place to cut it since we are going to start getting set up for the superhero RPG panel, which is going to be insane. It's going to be an extra long 2-hour one. If it goes well, could have some bleed over into At Home Comic Con 2022 with some ongoing continuity. Could be fun. But yeah, no, congratulations to it was Sophia who won
Mhm.
the
Sophia.
awesome. And yeah, we're going to have a giveaway for, I believe, the Mutants and Masterminds handbook. So if anybody wants to run a superhero RPG panel for themselves, go ahead and donate for the next panel. And we have plenty more great prizes and plenty more amazing panels going on in the future.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that panel. It's something that I've kind of been one of the pet projects I've really tried to get off the ground this year. It was something that Chris from Comic Tropes kind of pitched to me. And as soon as he suggested it, I kind of fell in love with the idea. And we've got some really awesome panelists. It's being DM'd by Scott from NerdSync. We've got Eric Azana from the Geek Explain podcast, Luan Reedus, Tulok the Barbarian, and Jim Zub, the writer of the Dungeons and Dragons comics. And they're going to be doing a one-shot superhero themed RPG. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to be there front row watching it, and I hope you will be too. I want to give a big special thanks to everyone that joined me in this panel right now. This has been a ton of fun. And before we go, if you want to just kind of let everyone know where they can find you, that would be great. Drake, should we start with you?
Yeah, so you can find me at youtube.com/comicdrake. And I know I'm also streaming this on there as well. So anybody that is watching on my channel, please, if you're interested in seeing the rest of At Home Comic Con, go ahead and go to the official At Home Comic Con YouTube channel or Twitch channel. We're going to be streaming the rest of it all day.
Sweet. Garrick?
I am Garrick, one half of Key Issues on YouTube. If you just look up Key Issues, you'll probably find us. You can follow me on Twitter at KI_Garrick, and I'm also on Instagram at Key Issues Garrick.
Brilliant. Patrick?
I am on YouTube and the social media platforms as Patrick H. Willems. The videos are mostly about movies, but occasionally comics creep in there.
Yeah, you have a short film or a long film premiering at some point this year, isn't that
It's-
correct?
No, it's turned into a feature film. I made poor decisions, and I'm very tired.
Don't
Only
we
on
all?
Nebula, right?
Exactly. Yep, $3 a month. It's a good deal, I promise.
And Ernie?
You can find me on youtube.com/blurred without fear, and blurred without fear just about everywhere else too. So just I'm in places, and I do stuff and things in regards to comics.
You know what? That's the greatest description I've ever heard. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll be back in 15 minutes with the Superhero RPG panel. I'm Owen Likes Comics. This has been Drake, Ernie, Garrick, and Patrick. And